In 2025, the economic scars of past policies still shape the global economy, casting long shadows over industries and communities on both sides of the border. The aftershocks of decisions made years ago continue to ripple through factories, boardrooms, and households, reminding everyone that the past is never truly past when it comes to international trade. Nowhere is this more evident than in the ongoing trade dispute between the United States and Canada, two nations whose economies have been intertwined for generations. What once seemed like an unbreakable partnership has been tested in ways few could have predicted. The world watched in disbelief in 2018 when the Trump administration imposed steep tariffs, 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum, targeting not just rivals, but close allies, like Canada. The move sent shockwaves through global markets, upending assumptions about the stability of long-standing alliances. For decades, NAFTA had ensured relatively free trade across North America, fostering economic growth and cooperation. But with a single stroke of the pen, trade policy was weaponized, shattering trust and straining the world's longest undefended border. The sense of partnership was replaced by uncertainty and suspicion. The impact on Canada was immediate and severe. Industries that relied on seamless cross-border supply chains, especially automotive and manufacturing, were thrown into turmoil. Factory managers scrambled to adapt, workers feared for their jobs, and entire communities braced for economic fallout. The very foundation of the US-Canada relationship was called into question. The official justification for the tariffs was national security, a claim that left many in Ottawa stunned. For decades, Canadian metals had been a backbone of US defense production, supporting everything from cars to military vehicles. The idea that Canada posed a security threat seemed not only unfounded, but deeply insulting to many Canadians. Across both countries, skepticism grew. Many saw the national security argument as a thinly veiled excuse for protectionism, a way to shield American industries from competition rather than address any real threat. Economists warned of rising costs, lost jobs, and a dangerous precedent for future disputes. Businesses on both sides of the border faced chaos. Supply chains that had taken decades to build were disrupted overnight, leaving assembly lines idle and inventories stranded. Truck drivers waited for hours at border crossings while dealerships struggled to keep cars on their lots. The uncertainty rippled outward, affecting suppliers, retailers, and consumers alike. Diplomatic ties quickly frayed. Canadian leaders condemned the tariffs, calling them unjust and counterproductive. Behind closed doors, negotiators worked frantically to find a solution, but the mood was tense and trust was in short supply. Canada, left with few options, prepared to retaliate with tariffs of its own. The first shots of a modern North American trade war had been fired. What began as a policy dispute soon escalated into a broader conflict, with consequences that would echo for years to come, reshaping industries, altering alliances, and reminding the world that even the closest of allies are not immune to the dangers of economic conflict. President Trump staunchly defended the tariffs he imposed, arguing they were absolutely vital to protecting American industries and workers from what he described as years of unfair competition. He framed these measures not just as economic policy, but as a matter of national pride and security, promising that American jobs would no longer be sacrificed for the benefit of foreign countries. Trump claimed that countries like Canada had long taken advantage of the United States by flooding the market with cheap metals, undermining American manufacturers, and threatening the livelihoods of countless workers. He argued that these imports weakened the backbone of American industry, making the nation vulnerable to foreign influence. According to Trump, maintaining a robust domestic steel and aluminum sector was not just about economics, it was a cornerstone of national security. He warned that relying on foreign metals could leave the U.S. exposed in times of crisis, unable to produce the materials needed for defense and infrastructure. By linking economic strength directly to military might, Trump argued that a strong industrial base was essential for America's ability to defend itself and project power globally. He insisted that without secure supply chains, the nation's security would be at risk. Critics, however, were quick to highlight what they saw as the absurdity of targeting a close ally like Canada, whose metals, they pointed out, were not only high quality, but also integral to U.S. defense manufacturing. Many argued that punishing Canada could backfire, disrupting supply chains and harming both economies. The tariffs soon became more than just a trade barrier, they were a powerful bargaining chip in the high-stakes renegotiation of NAFTA. By putting pressure on Canada and Mexico, the Trump administration sought to force both countries into accepting the terms of the new USMCA deal, reshaping the rules of North American trade. Trump's approach to trade was unapologetically zero-sum. In his view, for America to win, others had to lose. This America First philosophy drove his administration's hardline tactics, appealing to voters who felt left behind by globalization. Despite mounting warnings from economists and business leaders about the risks of a trade war, Trump dismissed their concerns. He famously declared, "Trade wars are good and easy to win," signaling his willingness to escalate tensions if it meant gaining leverage for the US. Yet as the tariffs took effect, signs of economic damage began to appear. Factories faced layoffs, supply chains slowed, and uncertainty rippled through industries dependent on cross-border trade. Still, the administration's confidence remained unshaken, insisting the short-term pain would lead to long-term gain. In reality, the tariffs were less about genuine national security and more about using economic pressure as leverage, forcing America's trading partners to the negotiating table on U.S. terms, and reshaping the balance of power in North American trade. The result was a new era of uncertainty and confrontation in North American trade, with businesses and workers on both sides of the border left to navigate the fallout of a dramatically changed economic landscape. Ottawa's response was swift and resolute, sending a clear message both at home and abroad that Canada would not be caught off guard or intimidated by sudden policy shifts from its closest trading partner. The government moved quickly, holding emergency meetings and consulting with key advisors to craft a strategy that would demonstrate both strength and unity. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau addressed the nation, calling the new tariffs totally unacceptable. He firmly rejected the notion that Canada, a long-standing ally, could ever be considered a security threat to the United States. Trudeau's words were measured but forceful, making it clear that Canada would defend its interests and its reputation on the world stage. In response, Trudeau announced a series of dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs on $16.6 billion worth of U.S. goods. These tariffs were carefully chosen to target products from key American industries, items like bourbon, orange juice, and lawnmowers. By selecting goods from politically sensitive regions, the Canadian government aimed to send a message not just to Washington, but to American voters and businesses as well. The message was unmistakable. Canada would not be bullied or pressured into submission. Across the country, Canadians rallied together, waving flags and holding signs that read, "Stand with Canada." The sense of national pride and unity was palpable, as citizens from all walks of life voiced their support for the government's tough stance. At the same time, Trudeau's government launched a full-scale diplomatic offensive. Canadian diplomats worked tirelessly behind the scenes, meeting with international partners and allies to explain Canada's position. The dispute was framed not just as a trade disagreement, but as a defense of Canadian sovereignty and the broader rules-based international order. Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland became the face of Canada's response on the world stage. She emphasized that Canada's actions were measured and proportionate, designed to uphold fairness and respect in international trade. Freeland's calm but determined demeanor reassured both Canadians and foreign observers that the government was acting with principle and resolve. The Canadian public responded with overwhelming support, rallying behind the government regardless of political affiliation. In Parliament, members from all parties set aside their differences, presenting a united front in defense of Canadian interests. This rare moment of bipartisan unity underscored the seriousness of the challenge and the strength of the national response. Trudeau made it clear that Canada was prepared for a long and difficult fight. He pledged to keep the retaliatory tariffs in place for as long as the U.S. measures remained, signaling that Canada would not be the first to blink in this high-stakes standoff. This firm stance reassured Canadians, who watched the developments closely on the news, and sent a strong signal to Washington that Canada would not back down easily. The government's resolve inspired confidence at home and respect abroad. With billions of dollars in trade hanging in the balance, the stage was set for a protracted economic battle between two close allies. The stakes were high, not just for businesses and workers, but for the future of the Canada-US relationship itself. As the sun set over Parliament Hill, one thing was clear: Canada was ready to dig in, defend its values, and stand firm, no matter how long the fight might last. No sector felt the pain of tariffs more than the North American auto industry. Automakers like Ford, reliant on cross-border supply chains, saw costs soar overnight. Ford reported a $1 billion profit hit as tariffs drove up prices for both imported and domestic metals. The result: higher production costs, less competitive vehicles, and looming job cuts. The policy meant to protect American jobs now threatened them, as companies considered layoffs and reduced investment. The myth of the all-American car was shattered. Modern manufacturing was deeply North American. The tariffs treated this integration as a weakness, not a strength. For Ford and its peers, the trade dispute was an existential threat, not a distant political fight. The industry faced a nightmare with no easy escape. Tariffs are taxes, and American consumers paid the price. Anything made with steel or aluminum, from cars to canned goods, became more expensive. New vehicles cost hundreds or thousands more, forcing families to delay purchases or buy used. This suppressed demand, threatening jobs in manufacturing and sales. Economic uncertainty made businesses hesitant to invest or hire, slowing growth. Retaliatory Canadian tariffs hit U.S. farmers and manufacturers, slashing exports and hurting rural communities. The trade war became a multi-front economic battle, with ordinary Americans caught in the crossfire. The promise of prosperity gave way to widespread financial strain. Canadian families felt the sting as Ottawa's retaliatory tariffs drove up prices on everyday U.S. goods. Groceries, appliances, and even lawnmowers became more expensive overnight. The smaller Canadian economy was especially vulnerable, and the government faced a tough balancing act: show strength without overburdening its own citizens. Many shoppers turned to buy Canadian alternatives, but often paid more or had fewer choices. Small businesses relying on U.S. supplies struggled to absorb costs or risked losing customers. The trade war forced a costly reorganization of supply chains built over decades. In a deeply integrated economy, punishing your neighbor meant hurting yourself. Tariffs became a tax on prosperity, disrupting businesses and raising daily expenses. For Canadians, the trade war was a frustrating, tangible hit to their wallets. Economists and trade experts warned that the US-Canada dispute risked spiraling into a global trade war. The IMF and WTO predicted reduced global growth, drawing parallels to the disastrous Smoot-Hawley tariffs of the 1930s. Tariffs, they argued, are blunt tools that hurt both sides, threatening jobs, investment, and financial stability. The US was also fighting trade battles with China and the EU, raising fears of worldwide economic breakdown. Global supply chains built for efficiency and choice were at risk of unraveling. Despite these warnings, the Trump administration pressed on, dismissing expert concerns as fear-mongering. The disconnect between expert advice and political action fueled global unease. The world watched anxiously as the largest economy doubled down on confrontation. Behind the headlines, the trade war's human cost was devastating. Factory workers in the U.S. Midwest and Southern Ontario faced layoffs and uncertainty. For every job saved in steel or aluminum, several more were threatened in industries that use those metals. Communities hoping for a revival instead saw slowdowns and closures. In Canada, workers in agriculture and manufacturing faced cancelled orders and stalled investments. The integrated North American economy meant pain was shared on both sides of the border. The real losers were ordinary families, not politicians. The trade war's toll was measured in lost jobs and shattered livelihoods. As the dust settled, one truth was clear. In a trade war, there are no winners. The US faced higher prices and lost jobs, Canada endured tariffs, higher costs, and strained relations. Decades of economic integration were undone by a single policy shift. Companies like Ford depended on cross-border cooperation, not confrontation. Tariffs proved to be a destructive tool, inviting retaliation and leaving both nations worse off. Prosperity comes from cooperation, not economic walls. The Trump-era tariffs became a cautionary tale. Political decisions can unravel decades of progress. In the end, the trade war made life harder for ordinary people, proving that in a fight between friends, everyone loses.